Oh, look, meteor.
The sky spectacle leaving WA residents stunned.
Oh, what a sight! What a sight!
The streak of light soaring overhead around 6 this morning, early risers lucky enough to catch a glimpse. Captured on security cameras as others slept, seen across the state in Kalgoorlie, even spotted south in Mandurah. Rumours swirling that it could have been Russian space junk, experts quick to clarify.
That was one hell of a meteor. That was very nice, a nice little surprise for Mother's Day.
Predictions showing the meteor was between the size of a cricket ball or a basketball.
It's going anywhere between, 16 kilometres per second up to, nearly 60 kilometres per second. So that friction builds up and it causes the outer layer to melt, and that's where you're getting to see that lovely green-orange glow.
Scientists say the meteor seems to have passed over the central wheat belt, but they're not exactly sure where it may have landed, something they'll work to figure out over the coming days.
Wow!
Amber
A
Wilkinson.
blazing fireball has lit up the early morning sky, caught on camera in Perth and right across WA. Experts now searching to find out if or where the meteor landed.
Oh, look, meteor.
The sky spectacle leaving WA residents stunned.
Oh, what a sight! What a sight!
The streak of light soaring overhead around 6 this morning, early risers lucky enough to catch a glimpse. Captured on security cameras as others slept, seen across the state in Kalgoorlie, even spotted south in Mandurah. Rumours swirling that it could have been Russian space junk, experts quick to clarify.
That was one hell of a meteor. That was very nice, a nice little surprise for Mother's Day.
Predictions showing the meteor was between the size of a cricket ball or a basketball.
It's going anywhere between, 16 kilometres per second up to, nearly 60 kilometres per second. So that friction builds up and it causes the outer layer to melt, and that's where you're getting to see that lovely green-orange glow.
Scientists say the meteor seems to have passed over the central wheat belt, but they're not exactly sure where it may have landed, something they'll work to figure out over the coming days.
Wow!
Amber Wilkinson, 9 News.
A new discovery about Pope Leo XIV is striking a chord in New Orleans. His last name, Prevost, caught the attention of local genealogist Jerry Honora, who followed the trail through 19th century archives. What he found, the Pope's maternal ancestors were part of Louisiana's community of free people of color, a reflection of the region's Creole heritage shaped by French, Spanish, African, and Native American roots.
And for the Black Catholic community, I think that it shows just the depths of our heritage of faith that goes all the way back to the 16th century, even here in North America, both in freedom and enslavement.
The revelation adds a new dimension to conversations about identity, heritage, and the often complex choices families made to navigate race and status in America.
The idea that in America, people felt they had to escape their authenticity to be able to survive. So it's a story of blacks who went north and, quote, passed for white, or went west and passed for white. But it's also a story of Jewish Americans who felt they had to change their name and pretend to not be Jewish to be accepted professionally.
For some, the Pope's story is a reminder of both cultural pride and sacrifices many made to find acceptance in a divided society. At least 7 people have died in devastating overnight floods in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Local officials say torrential rain began on Friday night and lasted for about 10 hours, displacing more than 200 families. 9 houses were destroyed and 6 major roads badly damaged across several districts of the city. According to the Banadir Regional Administration, 2 of the victims were women and hundreds more have lost their homes. One father told AFP that 2 children died in his neighbourhood and he had never seen rain this heavy in Mogadishu. Meanwhile, another resident said people were trapped in their homes as the storm caused widespread havoc. A UN report published in April says more than 45,000 people have been affected by flash floods in Somalia since mid-April. The Horn of Africa is among the world's most climate vulnerable regions, and extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and intense. In 2023, over 100 people were killed and more than 1 million displaced by similar flooding linked to the El Niño weather pattern.
The United States and China have returned to the table in Switzerland. Trade talks have resumed amidst high tariff tensions, and Geneva is hosting a crucial round of trade talks between the United States and China this weekend. The first high-level meeting since President Donald Trump's latest wave of tariffs shook the global markets after Saturday's initial round. Negotiators from both sides reconvened behind closed doors on Sunday at the Swiss ambassador's residence in Geneva. Now, President Trump, in fact, took to Truth Social to praise what he called a very good and a very friendly round of talks, declaring it to be a total reset. The Chinese state media also struck an optimistic note, calling the meeting an important step towards resolving the escalating trade dispute. The standoff began earlier this year when the US slapped steep tariffs on Chinese imports, now totaling up to 245% on some goods. Beijing responded with retaliatory duties of its own amidst market jitters and rising concerns amongst global investors. Economists are calling the talks a welcome sign, but are tempering the expectations, and experts have warned that even if tariffs drop to 70 to 80%, then trade flows could still be cut in half. The Geneva talks come on the heels of a new trade deal between the US and the United Kingdom, a 5-page agreement that signals that Washington is open to sector-specific relief, but not a broad shift in tariff policy.
Here's my take. As the White House continues to take up all our attention with its ongoing tariff war with the world, a little ways down Pennsylvania Avenue, Congress is preparing a budget bill that could prove to be almost as consequential. If it renews Trump's 2017 tax cuts and enacts all his newly proposed ones and does not cut spending, they will add up to $9 trillion to the national debt over 10 years, according to the nonpartisan Peter G. Peterson Foundation. At that point, America would likely be running among its largest deficits as a percent of GDP in history, and that's in peacetime with no pandemic. At the same time, Washington is raising tariffs on almost all its imports. We may have the makings of a perfect storm in the global economy. That's what Kenneth Rogoff, a famous Harvard economist, worries about. One of his past books presciently warned about the dangers of a financial crisis. It was published in 2009 while the global financial crisis was unfolding, but of course was researched and written well before it. His new book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, worries that we are jeopardizing the dollar's pivotal role in the global economy. That should matter to all Americans because we benefit enormously from what has been described as the exorbitant privilege of having the world's reserve currency. Rogoff explained to me that it allows us to borrow more cheaply, whether it's mortgages, car loans, or credit card debt. And he estimated that the discount Americans get on their loans because of the dollar is probably between 0.5% to 1%. It's sometimes hard to detect the signal amidst the buzz of noise that surrounds us these days, but Rogoff says focus on interest rates. The key fact is that after decades of falling and low interest rates, they are now up to historically normal levels and will stay up. That is what makes America's debt burden dangerous. Interest on the debt now approaches $1 trillion per year, more total defense spending. The economic historian Neil Ferguson has suggested that when this happens, a great power risks that it will no longer be great. Rogoff predicts an economic storm, and that it will be a good bit sooner because of Trump's economic policies. He believes that unless these policies are drastically reversed, there is a 50% or more chance of a financial crisis or spiraling inflation or both by the end of this presidential term. Some of the pressures we face are because of events outside America's control. Other countries have always resented the dollar's exalted status, especially once America began to weaponize it. Washington has promiscuously imposed sanctions on dozens of countries, often unilaterally, and these sanctions work only because of the dollar's special status. The Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians, and mostly every large country is quietly making efforts to wean themselves off their dependence on the dollar. It's a slow process, but it is moving in only one direction, away from the dollar. And while there's no single substitute for America's currency, Rogoff believes that the dollar will lose share to a basket of other currencies as well as alternatives like Bitcoin. This is not all about Trump. Rogoff argues that there has been a bipartisan recklessness in America's fiscal policy for decades, with Republicans cutting taxes and Democrats spending, both without restraint. It is worth noting, however, that the math is clear. Tax cuts are responsible for the vast majority of the increase in the debt-to-GDP ratio over the last 25 years. He is also profoundly worried that the Federal Reserve's independence is being compromised both from the right and from the left. Though it's worth noting that Trump is the first president to routinely attack the Fed, threaten to fire its chair, and challenge the legality of independent institutions like it in court. Rogoff told me much of the dollar's role comes from our reputation for good, stable, predictable policy, from the Fed's independence from political pressures, from our trustworthiness as the world's superpower. You can't trash all that and expect the dollar to be unaffected. There are solutions, of course, but none are painless. Doge has been an abject failure. Of the $165 billion it claims to have saved, estimates of its actual verifiable savings are around $65 billion, and even that might be an exaggeration. Anyway, that is 3% or less of the $2 trillion Elon Musk confidently predicted he would cut from the federal budget. That leaves us where we always were. The path to reducing the deficit is to cut the big programs like Medicare, Social Security, and defense, and also to raise taxes. We are on track to do the opposite, enact huge tax cuts and jack up defense spending by, if Trump's proposal is accepted, a whopping 13%. Rogoff says we have been smart and lucky for the past few decades, which has allowed us to run up deficits with no visible costs. But our economic policy is now, quote, dumb, the worst in my lifetime, unquote. And our luck might have run out.
I'm Andy Mack now here in the anchor chair, and we do have some big developments in terms of the war in Ukraine as a potential meeting between Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Russian President could be happening as soon as Thursday in Turkey. And I do want to put up just this here, a statement on social media from the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, about this, saying, "We await a full and lasting ceasefire starting from tomorrow to provide the necessary basis for diplomacy. There is no point in prolonging the killings. I will be waiting for Putin in Turkey on Thursday. Personally," he says, I hope that this time the Russians will not look for excuses. And that is a big deal. The quote there saying, I will be waiting for Putin in Turkey on Thursday. And this could be a substantial development as we're following it. The latest saying he's hoping for that full and temporary ceasefire starting Monday. His comments came after President Donald Trump insisted Ukraine accept Russia's latest offer of holding direct talks in Turkey on Thursday. Ukraine, along with the European allies, had demanded Russia accept an unconditional 30-day ceasefire starting on Monday before holding talks. So that is a big if. It was not clear if Zelensky was conditioning his presence in Turkey on that Monday ceasefire holding. So this comes as we are following the latest as Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky welcomed Russia's offers for direct peace talks, but insists there must be a full temporary ceasefire in place before the negotiations can take place. And of course, these were some comments by President Donald Trump on social media, talking directly to Vladimir Putin, saying President Putin of Russia doesn't obviously doesn't have the ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath. Ukraine should agree to this immediately. At least they would be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible. And if it is not, European leaders and the U.S. will know where everything stands and can proceed accordingly. I'm starting to doubt that Ukraine will make a deal with Putin, who's too busy celebrating the victory of the World War II, which could not have been won, and not even close, without the United States of America. Have the meeting now. That's the final line of President Trump's comments about this between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin of Russia. So we'll see if that comes of it. And it would be a major development if those two leaders were in a room together in Turkey on Thursday about this war that continues to span, stretching into its fourth year. We've detailed it very, very closely. But as you also heard in some of those social media posts, maybe conditional on that ceasefire being agreed to by Russia. So you heard those comments from Zelensky just a little bit ago.
Look, this is the president's agenda. At home here, it's peace and prosperity in the United States. He has the same agenda for the Middle East, peace and prosperity in that region. It's achievable. It's in reach. But it takes bold leadership and not the previous administration's sole focus on the biggest troublemaker in the region. We're going to visit our allies.